Mic check, mic check. Hello. Oh, I think there's a problem in my mic. Hello, hello, hello. Mic check. One, two, three. Okay. I guess it's not working. Okay. ये मैं बिना mic के ही कह रहा हूँ. This is really ironic. So today we are going to start with Gujarat Files, Anatomy of a Kebab by Rana Ayyub. Sharing the link on Twitter. Walaikum assalam, Lukman. Hopefully you're doing good. So I just ran a poll on Twitter और बाकी जगह भी तो almost majority of the people nodded yes to this. तो मैंने सोचा ठीक है फिर पढ़ लेते हैं गुजरात फाइल्स. तो पहले लिंक शेयर कर लेते हैं ट्विटर पे, फिर लोग ये ना कहे कि हमें बुलाया नहीं गया. गुजरात फाइल्स कंट्रोवर्शियल, क्या करें. वो लोग कश्मीर फाइल्स बना सकते हैं तो हम गुजरात फाइल्स नहीं पढ़ सकते क्या. वालेकुम अस्सलाम Ainan. Hopefully you are doing good. Welcome to the stream. So once we cross 1K, I have promised myself and my listeners that I'll be getting a mic. Inshallah. So 1K में we. Walaikum assalam, Shelly. How are you and how is Emma? So we are very close to 1K. I guess 37 or 38 subscribers more, perhaps. Um, Let me check. Here it is, Jaunism. Yeah, 37 more subscribers and we will be at 1K inshallah. तो उसके बाद we'll be getting a mic and जो स्ट्रीम्स होंगी वो दिन ब दिन बेटर होंगी इंशाल्लाह. तो ये वाला घंटा हम प्रोडक्टिव यूज करेंगे. इसी तरह आगे जाके देखते हैं what will we be doing. रूमी को कंटिन्यू रखेंगे as always. You have also promised us for gifts. हाँ, प्रॉमिस मैंने गिफ्ट्स का भी किया है. डेली लिसनर्स जो मेरे कंटिन्यूसली लिसनर्स रहे हैं यहाँ पे स्ट्रीम में, बट ओनली आफ्टर माय चैनल गेट्स मोनेटाइज्ड. And the second condition for this thing is 4,000 streaming hours or 4,000 viewing hours. We are currently at 615 hours. We have to complete at least 3,400 hours to get this channel the status of monetized or monetization or the blue tick. तो उसके लिए मेहनत करनी पड़ेगी. आपको रोज आना पड़ेगा, ये घंटा यहाँ पे देना पड़ेगा. ऑब्वियसली अगर आप लोगों को नींद आ जाए इसी में तो फिर क्या ही कहना. इससे पहले कि मैं ये स्टार्ट करूं, जब तक सब आ जाए, तो अगर आप इस बुक का पहला पन्ना देखेंगे तो वहां पे आप पाएंगे, अगर आप पढ़ेंगे तो आपको मिलेगा ये कि राना अयूब is dedicating this book to Mukul Sinha and Shahid Azmi who gave me a purpose to fight for Abba and Ammi. देखिए मैं ये कहना चाहूंगा, यहाँ पे थोड़ा सा ऐड करना चाहूंगा. Shahid Azmi has been an idol for me also. Shahid Azmi का एक फील्ड है and he's no more. He was martyred way back, I guess around 2010 or 11. सो अगर आपको फुर्सत मिले कभी तो आप शाहिद आज़मी की लाइफ के बारे में जानिएगा, पढ़िएगा, रिसर्च कीजिएगा। आपको एक बहुत बड़ी हस्ती मिलेगी। बहुत ही कम उम्र में he lost his life to conflict. He was martyred और उनको मार्टियर वहीं पे किया गया था जहाँ पे उनका अपना वो फील्ड था। Not only has Shahid Azmi been an idol to Rana Ayyub, but to many of us. So हमने लिंक शेयर कर दी है। आई गेस सो। मैं पहले चेक कर लूँ हुई या नहीं। ओ, हुई है लिंक शेयर या अब कंफर्म करके बता दीजिए मुझे, या तो मैं खुद देख लूंगा। लेट मी चेक माई सेल्फ। तब ये कंडीशंस नहीं, मैंने तब ही ये कहा था कि पहले चैनल जो है मोनेटाइज होगी, उसके बाद ही जो मेरे तब तक कंटिन्यूअस लिसनर्स रहेंगे, क्योंकि उन्हीं वही लोग डिजर्व करते हैं। हाँ, ये मैंने कर दिया शेयर, ठीक है, ओके, आई गेस। हाँ, ठीक है, तो चलिए, वी हैव शेयर द लिंक and we are waiting for people to come. Assalam. It is already 10:40, perhaps 10:45, and it's getting late. I think we should start the book. Cinnamon is not here. इस तरह आप तो अब आती नहीं है. NC David is not here. सारिम तो अब आते नहीं है. Hmm, who else? डेली लिस्टनर्स में कौन था? और शिवांग वगैरह वो तो बिल्कुल भी नहीं आते, अब उनमें से कोई भी नहीं आता। राइजिंग स्टार कोई था, वो भी नहीं आते अब। बिस्मिल ये नया नाम आया है यहाँ पे। बिस्मिल इज अ न्यू नेम। इज्जो नहीं आता अब। यक्ता तो बिल्कुल भी नहीं आते, उनको तो बिल्कुल पसंद नहीं है ये बुक्स बुक्स वगैरह। हम्म, और कौन डेली लिसनर्स में था? हु एल्स वाज देयर? एनसी डेविड तो बिल्कुल रोज आती है कंटिन्यूअसली। आइनैन भी अब रोज आती है। सिनेमैन आज नहीं आया है, वो कुछ दिनों से 10-12 डेज में नहीं देखा उनको शायद कंटिन्यूअसली आते हुए। इट्स ऑलरेडी 8 मिनट्स। थोड़ा और 2 मिनट वेट कर लेते हैं, ताकि फिर लोगों को ये शिकायत करने का मौका न मिले। ठीक है ना? लेट्स वेट फॉर 2 more minutes, उसके बाद हम बुक शुरू करेंगे। ओके, वी हैव 6 लिसनर्स नाउ। ज़्यादा वक्त मैं इंतज़ार नहीं करूँगा, बस 10 मिनट तक हम वेट करेंगे। 8 minutes and 40 seconds already there. 1 minute and 20 seconds more and we will start the book, क्योंकि टाइम अपना है नहीं। वालेकुम अस्सलाम सुनैबा, hopefully you're doing good. Welcome to the stream. Yeah, I too am doing fine. तो हमारे पास कितने लिसनर्स हैं अभी? 6। 30 seconds more and we'll be starting with the book as promised। 10 minutes में मैंने कहा था बुक स्टार्ट करेंगे तो करेंगे। जिसको रहना होगा वो रह लेगा, जिसको जाना होगा वो जाएगा। टू बी ट्रू, मैं खुद सीख रहा हूँ, मुझे बड़ा मजा आ रहा है बुक्स पढ़ते। और हर एक चैनल एंटरटेनमेंट के लिए नहीं होती है, एंटरटेनमेंट की हद है, ठीक है ना? एंटरटेनमेंट की अपनी एक हद है। चलिए हम शुरू कर लेते हैं, ठीक है। स्टार्टिंग विद द बुक राना अयूब। इसका फॉरवर्ड पढ़ लेता हूं पहले। ट्रूथ इज स्ट्रेंजर देन फिक्शन, but it is because fiction is obliged to stick to possibilities. Truth isn't, said Mark Twain epigrammatically. But the nature of truth has baffled philosophers all over the world for ages. Like the Holy Grail, it is envisioned differently by different persons in different times and tracts. People who pursue the truth single mindedly must of necessity tread the lonely path beset with travails and tribulations, bereft of expectation of help from anyone except their own conscience to guide them. This version of the truth of the disturbing events in Gujarat during 2002 and the saga of fake encounters makes fascinating reading. According to the author, this book gives the reader an insight provided by the lens of a spy camera and spy microphone, both of which were freely used in a long drawn sting operation. As to whether the material presented in this book represents facts or mere perspective visions of the event is for the reader to judge. The narrative interspersed with quoted conversations makes interesting readings. It is for the state apparatus enforcing the rule of law and constitutional machinery as it's central to objectively assess the trustworthiness of the facts narrated here and take necessary action to restore the faith of the citizens of this country in the rule of law. With the painful experience gathered from the Commission of Inquiry that went into the riots and the violent incidents in Mumbai during December 1992, January 1993, and the sense of apathy towards the victims of such riots, that was clearly discernible. One feels that it is the time that the state machinery and constitutional functionaries displayed greater seriousness in investigating the causes of such riots and took appropriate steps against their recurrence. While one may not be in a position to validate all that is narrated in this book, one cannot but admire the courage and patience displayed by the author in her attempts to unmask what she believes to be the truth. Kudos to her and her brave essay in investigative journalism, the need for which seems to increase with increasing dishonesty, chisanery, and political political machinations. Mumbai, April 11th April 2016, B N Sri Krishna ने ये दे दिया है फॉरवर्ड इसका. नाउ प्रीफेस. वेलकम माजिद भाई. वेलकम वेलकम वेलकम. तो पहला इसमें कोट एक है. द स्ट्रगल ऑफ मैन अगेंस्ट पावर इज स्ट्रगल ऑफ मेमोरी अगेंस्ट फॉरगेटिंग. मिलान कुंद्रेरा. A haunting memory that remains an integral part of my life has to do with reporting for a news channel sometime in 2007 about the rape of a 3-year-old who was in a municipal hospital. Her parents, who sold pirated books at a different traffic signal, seemed to be under the influence of drugs and hence were unaware of the pain and the misery of one of their five girls. Walaikum assalam, Nancy. Her face and body were badly bruised, and the savagery on display all over the tiny innocent frame. I reached home at 2 in the night after sending in the tape of the story of the Delhi studio. I remember inundating the investigating officer in the middle of the night with messages to check if the perpetrator had been caught. The next day, I reached the hospital to see if the girl was recovering. She had developed multiple infections. Flies swarmed in her wounds while needles perforated her tiny wrists. Her parents were still not in sight. When I reached my office, I urged my boss to play it big so that the criminal was caught and brought to justice. He just smiled and continued gazing at his laptop. It was raining profusely, and my boss asked me to focus instead on the Milan subway and the rains and get some good shots of the flood. I cannot do this. I screamed at my mother when I called her on my way to the Milan subway, which is a favorite with camera persons in the Mumbai during its famed monsoon. My heart was pounding. I had not been able to eat all day. The third day after the incident, my family doctor had to give me a sedative. I called up my editor suggesting that I needed to take a week off. I had been working on an investigation of the Students Islamic Movement of India, SIMI, just prior to the story about the little girl, and had major arguments with him over ethics and morality in journalism. He gave me a patient ear and then said something which stayed with me. A good journalist should learn the art of detaching herself from a story and be pragmatic. Till this day, I regret being unable to master this art, particularly because very often it is used as an excuse to kill a story at the behest of corporate and political powers. Chapter 1. The summer of 2010 was to redefine journalism for me. I considered myself a hand working, mediocre reporter with a set of idols passed on by an old school journalist father. But at this time, I found myself at a crossroads I wish and pray no journalist is ever brought to. I had resumed work at the Helka after a long medical leave sometime in 2010. Doctors across the state could not diagnose my condition. I had returned from an assignment in the Naxal heartland of Gadchiroloi recently. Walaikum assalam, Junaid. The story preceded what I consider one of the most shattering incidents in my life, the assassination of a very dear friend, Shahid Azmi. One of the finest minds in criminal law, Azmi had come to assume a significant role in my life. On the evening of his death, I was to meet him to discuss the case of tribals and intellectuals who had been labeled Naxals by the establishment and were languishing behind bars on false charges. But fate had other plans. I stayed back at home at the insistence of my niece. It was her seventh birthday. There were dozens of missed calls on my phone, messages that asked me if I knew what the latest news was on Shahid, which I saw only later. The rest was conveyed to me by incessant phone calls from friends and breaking story on news channels. Shahid had been shot dead at his office by unknown assailants for taking up the cases of anti-nationals. Shahid's argument had recently led to the acquittal of innocents in the 7/11 Mumbai train blasts. After his death, Mumbai courts acquitted the two co-accused in the 2026-11 Mumbai attacks. The mastermind behind Shahid's assassination remains a mystery to this day, at least in the public eye. There are various ways to cope with one's loss. You either mourn or move on, or you run away from it and try to find solace in your work. I chose the latter. The third day after his death, I was on my way to Nagpur for what would turn out to be one of the most important stories in my journalistic career. It concerned the arrest of students, mostly from backward classes, on charges of being Naxalites. The evidence against them was laughable. They possessed literature of Bhagat Singh and Chandrasekhar Azad. It felt like remittance to me because my friend Shahid had died representing cases similar to this. In my mind, it was my tribute to his memory. But fate had other plans. I returned home soon after to an inexplicable ailment, which was later diagnosed as depression. The diagnosis was made after my paranoid parents got me to undergo every kind of test, from bronchoscopy to MRIs. Another doctor suggested that my parents start me on medications for tuberculosis. But as luck would have it, I chanced upon one of Mumbai's most acclaimed physicians in South Bombay Hospital, Dr. Chitnis. saw my reports, and asked me some questions. Then he took a deep breath and asked, "What's bothering you?" It was as if his words woke me from a stupor. "Nothing, doctor. I am just too drained and feel weak. Can't figure out what's happening." With a vague smile on his face, he said, "Get rid of this self pity. Stop glorifying your misery with these blood tests. You are absolutely fine. Get back to work. That's your panica. It's all in your head." "Is it hypochondria?" I asked. I had come across this term very recently while trying to self diagnose my condition. "No, you are just being plain lazy and running away from your responsibilities," said Dr. Chitnis nonchalantly. The next couple of days, I tried to make sense of Dr. Chitni's recommendations. It was on one of those lazy days that my mother decided to play catalyst. Amma, as I call her, has been one of my most loyal friends. She never really saw modern schooling. Abba was her teacher. She said she wanted to live her dreams through me. I would rebel. She would fight, canaille for me, and eventually everyone at home would come around. That day, as she served me coffee, she asked, "So are you quitting your job?" I shrugged, only interested in the cup of coffee that she had got along for me. Then, true to her character, she sat down next to me on the bed and started reading the Inqilab, a prominent Urdu daily. 10 minutes into reading the newspaper, she had just begun to ask me something when I stopped her midway. "Amma, if it is some summonizing that your newspaper carries today, please don't bother. I'm better off without it." "Arey nahi, did you read about Sohrabuddin?" she asked. For some reason, that name piqued my interest. Of course, I knew about Sohrabuddin. I thought to myself, he was the reason behind my first interaction with one of the most controversial figures of our times, Narendra Modi. In 2007, three of Gujarat's top cops were in the news after they were arrested by one of their closest colleagues, Rajneesh Rai, for having killed Sohrabuddin, a small time crook, in a fake encounter. DG Vanzara and Rajkumar Pandian were behind bars. They were the most trusted officers of Modi dispensation and had until then lived in glory, with newspapers flaunting their pictures at press conferences every day. They were the officers who had successfully tracked and managed to kill jihadists on their way to assassinate Narendra Modi, the Hindu Hridaya Samrat, earlier in 2004. Their arrest naturally attracted national attention. Having secured a job as a political journalist in 2007 with the television news channel, the first task at hand for me was to cover the 2007 Gujarat elections. Narendra Modi, the Chief Minister of Gujarat, was on his way to what most analysts predicted as another sweep. The 2002 riots into Gujarat that had polarized the society had made him a hero among the majority Hindu population. A victory sweep in 2007 did not look very difficult for him. Accompanied by a camera person, I found myself at his first election rally. I don't clearly recollect, but I believe it was organized by the Gujarat Chamber of Commerce. Narendra Modi was on stage with his man Friday, Amit Shah by his side, apart from other ministers. There were other political rallies too, which I had covered, and this seemed no different at first. But as my producers back in Delhi had told me, Modi had a knack for making provocative speeches. And that day he didn't disappoint. Sohrabuddin, they asked me, what do I do with a terrorist like Sohrabuddin? The crowds cheered. The ladies in the front row clapped. That row always was reserved for them, as it was believed Modi was popular with women in Gujarat. Columnist Akab Patel even wrote in a column for Gujarati women, Modi was a sex symbol. The response from the crowd was on expected lines. Kill him. Kill him? To me, it seemed like a Roman amphitheater. The speech continued with odious references to Mia Musharraf and Dilli ki Sultanate. When he had finished speaking, Modi stepped off the dais and was garlanded by the Gujarat Chamber of Commerce members. The crowd gathered around him. I squeezed in past his security cordon, screaming anxiously at my camera person who struggled to get in behind me. Modi ji, ek sawal. As luck would have it, the man who was behind, escorted by his fans and entourage, turned to look at me and in acknowledgement, expecting possibly a political question. Modi ji, three officers have been arrested in Gujarat and have been charged with fake encounter of Sohrabuddin. Would you still justify what you said in your speech? Expecting a response, I turned my mic towards him, but this turned out to be the camera person's moment. Narendra Modi stared at me for a good 10 seconds and then walked away. His minister gave me a look of disdain. This was my first encounter with a man now holding the most coveted position in the country, that of the Prime Minister. The Sohrabuddin story clearly had to be told, and the opportunity had presented itself to me via my mother reading her copy of Inqilab. On an instinct, I went to the local cyber shop. All links related to Sohrabuddin spoke about a CBI investigation into the case and the arrest of one of the Gujarat's top IPS officers, Abhay Chudasama. I was familiar with Chudasama. Just about an year ago, he had threatened me on the phone after I had published a confession by one of his star witnesses in the Gujarat blasts case. Chudasama was the officer in charge of the Gujarat blast investigation, which was eventually linked to the group called the Indian Mujahideen. One of the most articulate and media savvy officers in the state, Chudasama, it was rumored, was close to the Gujarat Minister of State for Home, Amit Shah. But Chudasama was different from others who had shot to fame. He was, as would be revealed later, a man who was more comfortable dealing with crooks and Hawala accounts. And Sohrabuddin turned out to be one of his own henchmen. With printouts and my notes ready, I wrote a note to Shoma Chaudhary and Tarun Tejpal, my editors back in Delhi, about the case and the need for it to be reported. At the back of my mind, I knew this could be my way out of the self imposed isolation and depression that had gripped me. Both my editors here, both my editors were more than encouraging, and I set off for Ahmedabad again. This was a visit that turned out to be a life changer for me. Within a month for my visit, I made two important exposes by digging out core records and internal notes with the help of officers who shall remain unnamed. I approached them cautiously, knowing fully well that they were my only hope. But trust does not come easy in a state like Gujarat, where officers who had decided to go by the call of duty had to suffer the wrath of the government. Most of them were also meeting me for the first time. To make matters more complicated, I was a Tahelka journalist, which roughly translated into the supposition that at any given point in time I would be armed with a sting camera. What I had encountered in Gujarat, though, was not a Gujarat centric issue. Prosecution of honest police officers was routine in Uttar Pradesh and Manipur as well, two stats I had extensively reported from. I also realized that same prosecution factor would turn out to be my savior. As it turned out, the officer would go on to reveal some of the most incriminating notes to me turned out to be a batchmate of an official I had reported about. That broke the ice. With able help from the human rights activists and officers who provided me with evidence, I made one of the most sensational exposes of the year. These were the core records of then Minister of the State for Home Affairs, Amit Shah, and top officers during the course of encounters. Accompanying the core records was a damning internal Official Secrets Act note. The minister's activity was being monitored by the state CID, and note alleged that the encounter was a sinister plot to kill innocents and label them terrorists. The expose created ripples in the political fraternity. Phone calls from the CBI poured in asking Tehelka to hand them those records, which were later placed before the Supreme Court. I continued to stay at Hotel Ambassador in Ahmedabad, which by now had become my second home. Located in the predominantly Muslim locality of Kanpur, this was a rather unassuming place for me to stay. I would discover later that the state BJP office was only blocks away. I was suddenly in the public eye. BJP leaders spoke about a certain young chap called Ayyub who had made the disclosure. For me, reason, for some reason, For some reason, the idea of a female investigative journalist had not crossed their minds. I was not complaining, it only allowed me to go about my work discreetly. But this did not last long. A few days into the expose, my phone received a text from an unknown number, which read, "We know where you are." Life had indeed changed. From that day on, I changed my accommodation every third day. From the IM campus in Ahmedabad to guest house hotels and gymkhanas, I had begun to operate like a fugitive. By this time, landlines had replaced mobile phone communication for me. Finally, having provided all the evidence I could dig up to the CBI and write my follow up reports, I landed in Mumbai and decided to go back to some semblance of routine. But destiny had other plans for me. Within weeks of expose, the CBI arrested Amit Shah, the first serving home minister in the history of independent India to be arrested. It became an overnight sensation. Most of the national media parked itself outside the CBI headquarters in Gandhinagar. As expected, I had to return to Gujarat and report on the developments that followed the sensational arrests. Shah's arrest gave a new lease of life to those political officers who had been discriminated against during his reign. Officers sent feelers to me at this time, saying that they wanted to talk. Many who had earlier avoided journalists now gathered the strength to speak. While most conversations went off the record, it was clearly that the encounters were only the tip of the iceberg. There was something more sinister that had been buried in the files of various cases in Gujarat. None of us were anywhere close to the truth. There was an indication that over the last decade there had been subversion of the judicial process. Those who were supposed to safeguard the lives of people had been brought to war. From the riots to encounters to political assassinations, many an inconvenient truth was waiting to come out. But how could one prove any of it? The basic rule of journalism was evidence, and I had none. There were only conversations and anecdotes, off the record confessions. How was I to prove it all? It was then that I made the decision that would change my life professionally and personally. Rana Ayyub had to give way to Metli Tyagi, a Kayastha girl from Kanpur, a student of the American Film Institute Conservatory who had returned to make a film on the development model of the Gujarat and Narendra Modi's rising popularity among NRIs across the world. Chapter 2. An elaborate mail to my seniors and an encouraging response from them to probe deeper was enough to set me thinking. Close to 3 months in Gujarat and the circumstances under which I had met those willing to help me with information was indication enough for me that the road ahead was tough. To cull the truth from individuals who were in a position of power and had chosen to seal the truth within themselves was not going to be easy. My colleague at work, Ashish Khetan, had made chilling revelations in his expose, in which he had stung the likes of Babu Bajrangi and other local BJP and VHP leaders as they mouthed a cold blooded narrative of the good riots in 2002. I was not up against the rioters who would speak of their bravado at the slightest ego boost. I was dealing with seasoned senior IPS officers, many of whom had had successful stints with RAW and INB. These were thick skinned diplomats. To get them talking would require skills of an able and astute investigator armed with power and authority. I did not qualify any of these accounts. Besides the planning, the execution, two had been left entirely to me. I was aware that I could not take a junior from my office for that would only mean that added risk. It was made clear to me that my editors would monitor my work, but everything else had to be my responsibility. Every time I sent in a transcript, I would get encouraging responses from both Shoma and Tarun with phrases like excellent, keep it up, keep at it, or stunning revelation. While it encouraged me to prove further, the truth was that I was a lone soldier on the field. I had to look at myself and ensure that the investigation yielded honest, fact based results. There were people who knew the truth and had chosen to live with it, going about life as if this incident, the cold political bloodbath that had taken place in 2002, was not a part of their career. As a journalist with an investigative organization like Tehelka, I knew every door that could have offered some help was closed to me. The only way out before me was what every journalist in the pursuit of truth uses as a lost resort: go undercover. I was all of 26, a girl, a Muslim girl at that. I have never been conscious of my identity. But when it came to a state polarized on religious lines, these considerations were to be considered judiciously. My family was to be told about it. Who would I be? Would I be able to pull it off without help? The fact that I had attended a well known mass communications course came handy at this time. Among my classmates were aspiring actors who had carved a niche for themselves in the film industry. Actor Richa Chadha, who was my classmate and one of the finest heroines, recently mentioned in an interview that she chose my career graph and experiences as a journalist to prepare for a film that had her play the role of a reporter. That long time no see call was made to another actor friend I considered my closest to. With my friend's help, I fixed an appointment with her makeup man. The next day, I was sipping chai at suburban Mumbai studio, learning the technicalities of getting myself the right wig. The makeup artist, who turned out to be a veteran, helped me with some of the ones he had stocked. The wigs made me look different, but something felt cosmetic and out of place. The wig makeover had been a non-starter. I thought a better idea would be to focus on changing my identity altogether. As luck would have it, I found an email on a group ID that I was a part of with my ex-classmates from a colleague who had joined the prestigious American Film Institute Conservatory in Los Angeles. It felt like a eureka moment. There was to my this was to my this was to be my identity. A filmmaker from America in Gujarat to make some sort of film. The idea was ambitious, but the possibility of it working was within the realm of possibility. I spent the next few days studying the work of the conservatory, its alumni, the films it had made, and doing research on the kinds of the films that had been made about Gujarat and the subject that had been most focused on. Finally, I decided to keep the subject of the film open ended depending on the kind of reception I received from the characters I would meet in the story, which had no script. I had to have a name, one which was warm, conservative, and yet strong in what it had to convey. I must confess that being a film buff did help me immensely. I love watching Hindi films, and one of the films that I remembered seeing at that point was Rajkumar Santoshi's Lajja. I had managed to watch it on a flight from Delhi to Mumbai. The strong female characters in the film were its USP, backed by power-packed performance by its lead, including Madhuri Dixit and Manisha Koirala. In the film, Koirala played a character called Maithili, who explored the lives of Indian women and gender-based suppression. Maithili was also the name of Sita, wife of Lord Ram. The name had a resonance that had stayed with me. When I found myself looking for a second name, which was common and without the snob value of some surnames indicating neither Brahmin nor Dalit status, Maithili Tyagi was born. My visiting card read Maithili Tyagi, independent filmmaker, American Film Institute Conservatory. But before I left for Gujarat again, I needed an able assistant who came along soon enough and whose presence would have a deep impact on my life. Mike, name changed, was a science student in France who happened to be in India on a student exchange program. Mike wanted to work in India with Indian journalists. I mailed him without giving him the precise details of the investigations that I would be conducting, yet trying to be as honest as possible. I told him that I needed non-Indian colleague who could pretend to be working with me on a film. This, I informed him, would be a part of a longer, more sensitive investigation. Mike would not be privy to the intricate details, I warned him. He would just be a Firang Gora face to authenticate my identity. Armed with my visiting cards, a pair of ash grey lenses, a hair straightener, colorful bandanas, and some recording instruments, I landed in Ahmedabad. Mike was to arrive a couple of days later. I immediately procured a SIM card in the name of Mithli Tyagi. I was surprised at the ease with which I managed one with the help of the documents arranged by my alleged guardian family in Ahmedabad. The investigation was to take a long time. Neither I nor my organization could afford the luxury of accommodating me in a plush hotel. Also, I was playing the role of a struggling filmmaker who had limited financial support. Accommodation for someone like that, could be arranged only by a local. This time, help came from an artist friend who was well connected in the literary and cultural circles in Ahmedabad. He was kind enough not to ask too many questions. That I was a journalist who had sent the HM, Home Minister of Gujarat, behind bars on account of her investigation was reason enough for him to use his influence to help me get accommodation at an educational institute, the Nehru Foundation. I was introduced as a filmmaker to the warden of the hostel at the foundation, who barely glanced at me and had an animated chat with the friend that was helping me. I had successfully secured myself a 250 square feet room with an adjoining washroom for 250 rupees a day. As it happens, the fellow occupants at the hostel played important roles in my investigation. They were students from different parts of Europe, Germany, Greenland, and London. Manik Bai, name changed. The dean and the manager of the hostel was my first acquaintance. Madam is here to make a film on Gujarat, is how my friend introduced me to him. Oh, nice, remarked Manikbhai. Please say good things about my stay and our CM. It's a beautiful stay, this Ahmedabad, he said, offering to show me around the stay in the same breath. My room had space enough for a single bed, a writing table, and a book stand. But the location of the hostel made up for the lack of space. Situated in one of the most plush and central areas of Gujarat, this place, this place became my home away from home over next 6 months. Mike arrived the following morning, a bright, tall French boy, all of 19, with messy hair. I met him at my friend's place, where I briefed him about his role before he accompanied me to the hostel. Manik Bhai was kind enough to give Mike a room adjacent to mine for the next month. That Mike impressed him with his Show obviously played a role in this. Mike was a learner and loved exploring and learning about cultures, but his particular favorite was food. Our first dinner that evening was at the popular thali joint in Ahmedabad called Pakwan. As Mike and I now fondly remember, he must have finished off at least 2 dozen puris and 6 bowls of halwa that night, much to my puzzled amusement. As we walked up the stairs, as we walked up the stairs of the hostel after dinner, he asked, "So can I call you Rana when we are by ourselves?" No, I will be mately for you till you leave this country. Mike kept his promise. The goodbye card that he left for me a day before leaving for Paris had a note scribbled in Hindi. Pyari Maitli, apna khayal rakhna, Mike. We spent the first few days at the Nehru Foundation getting accustomed to our new lives. Mike would sit in his room with his French Hindi translation book while asking me questions simultaneously reading a book by Mark Tully. For his age, Mark was very well read, opinionated, and had an incisive, analytical mind. He was quick to grasp details. We had a canteen at the foundation which served lunch for 25 rupees. It overlooked a carved staircase at the Institute Terrace, beyond which lay a picturesque forest. Every afternoon, Mike and I would carry our laptops to the terrace, eating our lunch and working simultaneously. He would ask me so meekly, "What's the plan? Who are we going to meet?" And I would repeat myself, "I will tell you when the time is right." In the evening, Mike and I would take our cameras out and go to the old city to shoot. Both of us shared an interest in photography and both had similar SLR cameras. The exercise had nothing to do with our love for photography, however. It was an exercise in strengthening about the authenticity of our rules for ourselves. And anyone who might have been watching us, if he had to approach top ranking officials, there would most certainly be a background check, especially at the place where we were staying. We needed to have a social circle in Ahmedabad which could vouch for our assumed identities. Ahmedabad, Ni Gufa, the historic art museum set up by the famous artist M.F. Hussain, turned out to be of great help for us. The museum, surrounded by a huge park and a cafe, had youngsters, mostly artists and photographers, lounging around. Some played the guitar, some promoted their work, others included aspiring filmmakers, photographers, and actors. During our evenings at this place, I would thoroughly enjoy my life as madly, and so would Mike. Mike loved the Lal Darwaza, a prominent part of old Gujarat. Every Thursday, there would be an open market there. Then there were the kite makers and the potters. He would come back in the evening with some spectacular shots and then pop his favorite question: "Where are we eating tonight?" He was a foodie, and Gujarat was the right place for him. In the meanwhile, help arrived in the form of an email from an activist friend. I needed to establish some sort of contact with the officers, and the first in my list was GL Singhal, the then posted with the ATS in Gujarat as its de facto head. Singhal was being probed for his role in the Ishrat Jahan fake encounter. From what I gathered during my research with my officer friends and journalists, he had isolated himself, had few friends, and did not entertain the media at all. I had been told that he was suspicious of almost everyone. How then could one approach him? The email had details of Naresh and Hitu Kanodia, both popular actors in Gujarat film industry. As a matter of fact, Naresh Kanodia was known as Amitabh Bachchan of the Gujarat film industry. Hitu was his South Mumbai educated son who had decided that it was wiser to follow his father's footsteps than wait for a break in the Hindi film industry. I was informed in the mail that the Kanodias were from the backward classes and had a great rapport with many officials, including Singhal, who happened to be a Dalit. Excited, I called up Naresh Kanodia, who asked me to come and see him at the Gymkhana in the Ahmedabad the following morning. When I met him, he gave me nothing away. He was absolutely expressionless while I spoke to him in my well rehearsed, accented English. He turned back to look at the mirror, took a swipe at his hair with a comb, and then remarked nonchalantly, "Ben, हिंदी में बोलो ना और थोड़ा आहिस्ता बोलो बहुत फास्ट हो तुम." I had clearly not done my homework well. I spent the next hour explaining the subject of my film to him. The lesser known things about Gujarat is what I wanted to make a film on. I told him, for instance, Gujarati film industry and how those from the backward classes had progressed in Gujarat. Now I began to see a flicker of interest in his eyes. For a man who considered himself a star, but whose success had faded in his home state with the popularity of Hindi films, an acknowledgement of his work from a Vilayati filmmaker seemed to finally have the desired effect. The next day, I was to drive 100 kilometers to a village where Kanodia wanted me to interview him and watch his stunts on a film set. As I went back to my room after meeting him, I sat in bed wondering about the futility of the exercise. The prospect at hand was high risk, but this was the only way. Armed with the SLR and notes, I stepped out of my room next morning only to be stooped by Mike. Your lenses are missing. I was still getting used to my new avatar. The film set was constructed on the outskirts of the city in a village near where thousands had gathered to witness the spectacle. Kanodia's son Hitu, a rather dapper South Mumbai grad, was depressed up as a prisoner while his father played the role of a cop. I was given a chair to sit and watch the shooting. I went about my task. I went about my task diligently, taking notes and photographs of the sequence. I was not the only one there, I noticed. A young man in the early 30s, armed with a tripod and lenses, was taking some stunning shots of the sequence. He was clearly not a part of the unit. He gave Mike and myself an indifferent look when Kanodia introduced him to us as a documentary photographer and went about working on his streams. The photographer was Ajay Panjabi, name changed, with whom I was to develop a strange camaraderie in the months to come. A friendship that I could never have had with my real identity. A friendship whose base was deceit but neatly needed that outlet. The next few days went by with me visiting Kanodia's set, engaging in conversation, discussing nonsense of the film while sipping the unit cut chai. Ajay, who was a regular on the sets for his documentary on Gujarat films, ultimately decided to be polite and, in due course, offered help if needed. It was one of these visits to the film sets that I broached the subject of meeting some well known cops in Gujarat, especially those from backward classes. I told Kanodia that it would help if the official in concern held a sensitive position, one that involved bravado and had something to do with security in Gujarat vis-a-vis terrorism. The last line had the required results. You should meet Mr. Singhal, one of our finest, killed many terrorists. I tried to conceal my excitement and went about noting down his name, and as if I had heard it for the first time. So, what does Officer Singhal do, sir? Where does he serve? I asked with great show of naivety. This was all I needed from my filmy friends, an entry point, a reference that would not draw suspicion with the officers. The last person Singhal would doubt would be a filmmaker who had been recommended by one of the topmost regional filmmakers. At around the same time, a source in Ahmedabad, whom I had briefed on the help that I needed, sent me another mail. This had contained the details of one of the city's most popular gynecologists who shall remain unnamed. My Uninar mobile network was not too kind on me every time I used it from the confines of my room. So most of the time I had to walk up to the terrace while where inmates of the hostel would hang around for a chai or to lit a cigarette. Mike was one of them. Later that day, I called the gynecologist from the terrace and introduced myself as a filmmaker who wanted to make a film on Gujarat and also wanted to capture the health sector in her film. The doctor seemed to be an affable individual and asked me if I could drop in at his hospital the same evening. I was more than willing. Just as I was about to leave, Mike came running. Mately, can I ask you something? He said. Mately, I can't work like this. You tell everyone we meet that you are making a film, but I am working with you. You should tell me the truth. I tried to brush aside Mike's curiosity, but now he was insistent. Even hurt, I'm not a child, you know. I did a lot. I am on an exchange program because I have achieved something in my life. You should tell me, do you trust me? Or for you, I am just a foreign face you want to show around, more like an accessory. I thought it was a very well rehearsed line, but there was something about his outburst that persuaded me to take him into confidence about my real investigation. Before I left for my meeting, I forwarded him some links to my earlier stories. I asked him to read them so that by the time I returned that evening, he would know the entire background to the current investigation. My meeting with the doctor turned out to be extremely fruitful. He was more than eager to help. I asked him if I could meet a female doctor, someone who was very popular in Gujarat. Someday I could shoot for the film. I had anticipated the response. There was a reason I had made efforts to meet a gynecologist after all. The 2002 Gujarat riots that had become a blot on the country's secular fabric had seen many agent provocators, and one of them was Maya Kodnani, an MLA from Ahmedabad who had been named in eyewitness accounts as one of the major instigators of riots in her constituency. Kornani for me was an important character to explore as I felt sure that she could help me to go deeper into the story. That evening, the doctor called Maya Kodnani in my presence, suggesting that a filmmaker with an impressive profile from USA wanted to interview her and he could personally vouch for credentials. To keep my act going and to avoid suspicion, I continued meeting with the doctor once a week after that for what I would call my research work. That evening, when I returned to the hostel, Mike had jotted down several questions for me on a piece of paper, including names of those he thought were criminals. Mike was right. There was a reason he had been chosen to be a part of the exchange program. He listened to me with the great concentration that evening, asking the right questions, grasping right nonce. I told him about the plan of action and how I would be forced to modify it spontaneously. Things didn't go as planned. How will we go about it? He asked. Tomorrow, I told him. We have to sit for our first test. Next day, we were to meet Maya Kornani. As an investigative journalist, I knew that information does not start flowing easily in the beginning. And even if it does, one should not display too much curiosity. I briefed Mike accordingly. We have got to be filmmakers today, just filmmakers. Maya Bain's clinic was situated on the main road at Naroda. Naroda Patia massacre took place barely a stone's throw away from his three-time MLA's clinic. A massacre which saw more than 100 people being brutally lynched. The allegation against her was that it was she who led the mob that attacked Muslims while making provocative slogans. Mike and I entered Kornani's clinic, where local women sat on narrow tables outside her cabin. At the entrance were two burly, well built men, one of whom possessed a gun. Seeing me and Mike, he stopped us, cross checked with his boss on the phone, and then let us in. He was Kornani's bodyguard, who had manned her clinic ever since she had been nailed by the SIT Special Investigation Team. It was a two-story building with clinics of various other doctors in it. Next to the clinic was an operation theater. On Thursdays, the number of the patients at the clinic, mostly from the lower income group, doubled. At display plate read only 50 rupees to be charged on Thursday. The compounder, who eyed us suspiciously, informed us that the clinic only catered to locals. I am a filmmaker, I told her, here to meet madam. I tried to scribble something in my notebook while Mike watched Sanskar channel on a TV set. An elderly lady who was waiting with her daughter in law paid her obeisance to the Baba on TV and by prostrating herself in front of the TV set. Mike looked at me with bewilderment. I grinned at him and turned back to my notebook. At that moment, Methli, at that moment, Methli Conche asked Conani's assistant as she stepped out of her cabin. She signaled for me and Mike to step in. I introduced myself and Mike with an accent. A warm handshake followed. You know you have a beautiful name. It's the name of Sita ji, said a visibly impressed Konani. Oh yes, madam, my dad's a Sanskrit teacher, so all of us at home have beautiful names. That statement proved to be reassuring for Kornani, who, much to Mike's irritation, did not give him a second look. There were books of medicine and gynecology, and some pamphlets of the BJP and some of the Sindhi community in Gujarat on Kornani's desk. Next to these was a photograph of her son and daughter in law who were settled in the US. We discussed her career over the next hour, and she talked about her family as cold drinks arrived, with reference to the fact that Maya Bain was the Minister of Child Welfare and Health. I praised her commitment to the welfare of women in her state. So, what do you want from me? She asked finally. I just want to know more about you, ma'am. We want to profile you for our film. As an achiever from Gujarat, nobody in their right, especially if they belong to the political tribe, hates to hear kind, flattering words and be part of something that glorifies them. We got an instant nod from her and an invite to her apartment for lunch the following Sunday. That would be perfect, I told her, trying my best to roll my rupees. Before leaving her cabin, I remembered to praise Miss Kodunani's sari and accessories. As we walked down, the security personnel did not look very impressed. We hailed an auto and headed straight to Pakwan. You noticed she was not even interested in talking me, said a visibly upset Mike. Before I could reply, the halwa and rabri arrived. When they served the thali in Gujarat, they served the dessert first. Mike's attention was diverted. Kodnani was forgotten. As the Maharaj tried to help him pronounce the name of each preparation, it was a relief. We returned to the hostel room at around 10 in the night. As soon as I stepped into my room, I got an eerie feeling. Something seemed out of place. I had carefully made my bed before leaving, but now the bed sheet was crumpled and my laptop was switched on, while the suitcase and drawers looked untouched. I felt someone else had been in my room that night. I was not surprised. I had actually anticipated something like this, which is why my laptop had been reformatted before I entered Gujarat. And the admin name was set as Mekli Tyagi. On the desktop were files of filmmaking and research on Gujarat museums and the film industry and forests. Adorning the screen was a wallpaper of Lord Krishna. On the shelf next to my bed were books of filmmaking and photography. It was fairly clear that someone has frisked my room, and I was fairly sure that they had found nothing they weren't supposed to find. The games had only just begun. आई थिंक इतना काफ़ी है. दो बंदे यहाँ पे हैं. कौन है यहाँ पे? हु इज़ लिसनिंग? आई गेस आइनैन. ये लोग पोल में वोट क्यों करते हैं? आई डोंट अंडरस्टैंड दिस थिंग. व्हाई डू दे इवन वोट? बड़ा कहते हैं गुजरात फाइल्स पढ़िए. देन दे आर नो वे टू लिसन. बड़े अजीब लोग. दे वांट एंटरटेनमेंट. अरे जाके बॉलीवुड मूवीज देख लो, तमिल देख लो, बहुत एंटरटेनमेंट है वहां पे. आई न्यू आइनैन इज हियर. मुझे पता थी आप यहाँ पे होंगे. शैली इज लिसनिंग टू. ग्रेट. Ah, yes, Shelly, because it's in English, that's why you're here. Cool. So we will continue it tomorrow. Z is also here. Wow. ये तो बहुत बड़ी बात हो गई. ये तो आज ये सूरज कहाँ से निकला है? ये तो अचानक से अब आ गई. अदरवाइज शी वाज नॉट हियर. आइनैन का मुझे पता थी ये यहीं पे होंगी बिकॉज शी इज रियली मच इंटरेस्टेड इन लिटरेचर एंड ऑल. मुझे लगा ऐसा परसों गई जब उन्होंने बुक कंप्लीटली सुनी रवीश कुमार की एंड एल्केमिस्ट भी उन्होंने कंप्लीटली सुनी. ग्रेट. तो कल मिलते हैं फिर से यही बुक लेके। आई गेस मैंने अपनी लाइफ में पहली बार ऐसी कोई बुक देखी है, मतलब पढ़ी है, जिसमें इन्वेस्टिगेटिव जर्नलिज्म के रिलेटेड है। वरना मैंने स्पाइस के रिलेटेड पढ़ा है बहुत कुछ, या आप कहें ऐसा कि जो स्पाइस का काम होता है वो फैसिनेटिंग काम एंड ऑल, फिर उसने ऐसे किया वैसे किया, वो पढ़ा है मैंने। लेकिन जर्नलिज्म के रिलेटेड और इन्वेस्टिगेटिव जर्नलिज्म के रिलेटेड मैंने आज तक कोई बुक नहीं पढ़ी है। सो कूल। गुजरात फाइल्स, हेल टू यू। गुड। सब चले गए क्या? हु इज हियर नाउ? दो बंदे देख रहे हैं। इज इट सो? ओके, दो बंदे यहाँ पे हैं। वाह, ग्रेट। चलिए ठीक है, कोई नहीं। Okay, you are still here, Shelley. Tomorrow we shall continue this book. Shelley, out of 10, how would you rate it? Z, how would you rate this book so far? Out of 10. I think 8.5. 8, around 8. What do you people think? 8 or 9 or 7 or 6 out of 10 so far? Yeah, I think you people are gone again. For me, it's really interesting. I would say 9. Okay. So, Shelley, you perhaps have not read books. Why I actually took away 2 points from her book so far? Because when you are in a mood of, we can say, when you set the mood or tone of the story as investigative, or we can say, uh, when it is about to get you fascinated, related the concepts of investigation, because you are not an investigator, you have never been an investigator, so you set your tone to seriousness. She has actually pinched the salt of uh, lighter notes, we can say, or we can say that she has actually hollowed the seriousness out of it, because uh, many scenes she had actually narrated are related to the food, mic, and all these should be avoided so as to reduce the volume of the work. Come to the point. If you are an investigative journalist, come to the point. Do not include these things. These things are there to be put in a novel instead. Why we read novel? Because of these things. Eh, but इतना काफी है. I think this is more than enough for me to take away 2 points from her book. She's a good writer. बाकी सब. Ah, yes, exactly. You set your mood and tone accordingly. You're not reading a novel. You're not reading Alchemist. After all, it's an investigative journalism, and it's a serious, on a serious note, when you are a journalist of this caliber who got arrested, the man who right now is the home minister of India, and perhaps the most powerful man in current regime, you should not crack up jokes in between. ठीक है ना? सो मतलब इतना मैं क्रिटिक कर सकता हूँ. ओके, shall we continue with Rumi or shall we end it? बता दीजिए जल्दी. Should we end it right now? और रूमी का कुछ पढ़ लें? Should we at least read one of the points of Rumi? I'm really disappointed. लोग कितने ये हैं, आलसी हैं. All they are interested in entertainment. People want entertainment, and that's it. Show them a prank video, they'll be getting crazy about it. Okay. Shall we continue with Rumi or shall we end it? People are crazy about these entertaining videos. Okay, we will continue with Rumi. Let me end it. I think we should end it because we should end it. Let's actually put this stream in a playlist of under the heading of Rana Ayyub, and let's not mingle up Rumi with it. Okay, ending it. It's quite disappointing to be here. Really. Take care.